Hey everyone, as the title suggests, I'm going to be talking about one part of my TBR for this year, which is just reading all of the books that are unread on my shelf. So, they're not going to seem like a lot, but that's because my original collection of books was donated by my mother to some library somewhere in the process of moving from place to place, so I don't have that any longer. Anyway, it's fine. So I'm going to show you and introduce to you all of the books that I plan on reading from my shelf this year. I've recently bought a few of these books, but I wanted to have them before I talked about them. So here is my TBR, all of the unread books on my shelf that I plan to read in 2021. So the first book is, the first three books I should say are the last three books in the Millennium Series. The first being The Girl in the Spider's Web, the second one being The Girl Who Takes an Eye for an Eye, and the last one being The Girl Who Lived Twice. So these three books are the continuation of Stieg Larsson's books that I read in late 2020 into 2021 sort of. These are also the books that I'm buddy reading with my best friend. So the first book in the series is about a journalist who's hired by some old white guy that has a lot of money, to write his biography, but then to figure out who or what happened to his niece that went missing so many years ago. That journalist hires this genius computer hacker girl basically help him with the research because she's a fucking genius. So they join forces to figure shit out, it's so much fun because she's an unconventional whatever the fuck. So the second book is about this same journalist who has this newspaper or whatever, who's the publisher at a newspaper, and he's approached by another young journalist and his girlfriend who is a researcher in the same kind of context. She's getting her master's. They are writing an expose on the sex trade in Sweden, sex trafficking more like. And what happens is that young journalist and his girlfriend are murdered in the middle of all of this. The journalist that I mentioned in the first book and then that computer hacker girl get looped into it, and all this shit happens, and it's left on a cliffhanger that picks up in the third book. And the third book focuses more on the computer hacker girl, because in the second one she gets looped into the murder and all of that, but in the third book she kind of uproots the whole fucking thing. That's just the first three books. Now, these three books, I didn't know what they were about when I bought them, and I wasn't planning on finishing them, but my friend, Krishna, decided to continue, and I was like, oh fuck, well now I have to. So this fourth book is about the US is about to expose some shit or something, and they have to figure out what it is. I don't know. It's still the same computer hacker girl and journalist. The fifth book, which is my second book on my TBR, is The Girl Who Takes an Eye for an Eye. In this one, it focuses even more on the computer hacker. I think it dives deeper into her history, into her childhood and all of that. And I'm interested in reading this because there's a twin that's mentioned in the first and second-ish books that doesn't have really a ton of relevance in those two books, but I think she might come up in this one. So I'm excited to read this to get some closure on that, And then the last book in the series and the third book on my TBR is The Girl Who Lived Twice. So Stieg Larsson doesn't write these because he passed away in 2004, and those three first books were published posthumously. So these three were written by David Lagerkrantz. Super intrigued on how he's going to be able to maintain the same type of writing that Stieg does, because it's so intricate and super detailed, and sometimes can drag along almost a little too long, and then he picks it right back up, which is great. So anyway, this book is about her childhood shit, but then it unravels into this, The Girl Who Lived Twice, which is about her actual twin sister. So I think these two are gonna go hand in hand the way the second and third book did. On to the next series that I started a long time ago, picked up in the middle. Like, I tried to read this over the course of 3 years and I only got through 1.5 books. That is, I've already read the first book, A Game of Thrones. I am halfway through A Clash of Kings, and then I still have to read A Storm of Swords, Feast for Crows, and A Dance with Dragons. So, I mean, do I really have to go over what these are about? Most of you have probably already watched them, but I mean, I can't guarantee that I'll go through these in the order that I wish to, but I think I might like kind of vlog reading these books, just because I think like people like to see people reading a shitload of books at once. So, okay. The 8th book on my TBR is Titus Grown, which is the first book in the Gormenghast trilogy by Mervyn Peake. And Sunbeam's Jess recommended these, or she read them and it was in a wrap-up. And I was like, damn, that sounds right up my alley, because they're super dark and like dingy and gothic and all that stuff that I like. So I want to read Titus Grown, and then the second book is Gormenghast by Mervyn Peake, and then the third is Titus Alone. I hope I'm pronouncing those correctly. I have very little knowledge about what these are about, but I think that they might be about the people or the inhabitants of this creepy castle called Gormenghast. The 11th book on my TBR is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. All I know is that it's about two sisters, takes place in France, kind of follows their lives through World War II, I believe. And there's another book in my TBR that kind of goes really well with this book, but it's an audiobook, I believe. Or it might not be published yet, but I'll bring it up later. The 12th book on my TBR is Moll Flanders by Daniel Defoe. I don't think this has any chapters. It's just one long book. Anyway, I bought it because of the cover, because it's so creepy and dark, but it's about Moll Flanders, who is born to a woman who's in prison, and then she just like continues, like her whole life is just miserable thing after miserable thing. Yeah, I read 58 pages of it, but the language, it's written so many centuries ago, so the language is it's difficult to get a grip on. So like I tried to read this before bed every night when I was reading it, and that just was not happening for me. So I'm gonna read this finally. The 13th book on my TBR is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This book, I don't know if you can tell, but there used to be a library sticker right here, because I guess I borrowed it from my high school and I never returned it. It's been like 8 years, so I don't think they'll miss it, but I just love this cover. It's like, I don't like hardcover books, but the fact that it's like smaller in size and I can hold it like this, I just love it. And anyway, so Jane Eyre is about Jane Eyre, who goes through a number of obstacles in her life, falls in love with a man who is already married, has a cruel aunt. That's the extent of my knowledge. You can't go wrong with like a Bronte novel. The 14th book on my TBR is The Shining by Stephen King. Okay, everybody's seen the movie, everybody talks about how great this book is, and of course I want to read it, but I didn't have a copy of it that I wanted to like physically read until like recently. As you can see, it's quite the fragile book. Like I had to do a lot of surgery on this one. If you can tell, there's that. Half the fucking back is like messed up, and like the spine is coming apart, which maybe I should mend. But it's about Jack Torrance and his wife and son. They moved to the Overlook Hotel for a winter because it's the off season of the hotel, and he is hired to take care of it, and he's a writer, and he's having this like crazy writer's block. He decides like that it might be good for him to have a change of scene and all that, to read or to write his like next book, but he goes crazy. I love Stephen King's like that quality of his writing where he talks about the characters through their thoughts. I love that. The 16th book on my TBR is Dracula by Bram Stoker. All I know is that it's about a vampire, a count. I don't know, so we shall see. This is the 16th, and it is The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett. It's a hard-boiled detective novel, tried and true crime novel. Noelle has recommended this a few times. I think she's reading it for like the third or fourth time this year, and I have to. The 17th book on my TBR is Animal Farm by George Orwell. My boyfriend's read this and he's like, you have to read this. Like, how do you read books and you haven't read this? So I'm gonna read this, and I think it's just like an allegory of like communism. I think that's what it is though, because I've read the first like 10 or so pages and it's such an easy read, so I think I could bust this out really quickly. The 18th book on my TBR is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. Goodness gracious. And she is a woman who was, let's just call it what it is, right? She was raped by Brock Turner, and she writes her story, but also she intertwines like all these other topics that are like Americans are like sensitive to. I think it'll just be like my foot in the door for both memoirs and more nonfiction, because I think this book has like a perfect rating on Goodreads, I'm pretty sure, or damn near perfect. So the 19th book on my TBR is Spark Joy by Marie Kondo. It's just a little like refreshing nonfiction with like sprinkled infographics. It's so adorable. There's no harm in learning something that's gonna benefit me at the end of the day. And the last physical book that I want to read, The Limits to Growth. It's by Meadows, Randers, and Behrens III. It seemed academically charged when I picked it up, and I read the back and I was like, it's informative, that's great. Come like yesterday, 2 days ago, I read the syllabus to my land resource management class, and he references this book in his syllabus at some point. I was like, I had that book in my possession. Of course I have to read it now. So that was all of my TBR of all the books on my shelf that are unread that I hope to read in 2021. I hope you all enjoyed, and see you in my next video.